In this lesson, we're going to be considering the role that digital data plays in the operation of social power, experiences of the self, and also the creation of relationships. So, this is another angle in on the idea that media create reality. And what we're going to be looking at is the role that digital data, the evidence that media users leave behind them when they use media, how this is something which is employed to create certain kinds of experiences. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be relating this very directly to your experience. We're going to be looking at debates about digital data. Why are people so interested in how that data is created, shared, and operationalized? How does that data become something that's used in planning how to function within a particular workplace in this case? And we're going to be relating that to your experience of education. And we're going to be looking at the data about what you are doing in this module and using that to practice some of our research skills, particularly looking at the numbers about what you're doing in this unit via Moodle, and basically looking at those things and saying, what is absent from this picture? What does the data not tell us? So this will do a couple of things. Firstly, well, it'll do actually more than two things. Firstly, it will allow us again to practice the really important skill of identifying key theoretical debates, interpreting them, and then actually applying them to real world case studies. It will give us practice of learning to identify why media research matters to us and directly to our situation. And it will also give us practice in thinking critically about evidence. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the data that you leave when you use Moodle, and we're going to be thinking about that data and saying, what does that data tell us? But also, what does it not tell us about what you're doing and what you're like as media learners? So we're going to be directly practicing applying theory to evidence, and again thinking about a different sort of reality effect. And this is the way that media use creates social relationships in relation to power and ideas of the self. So the first thing I want to do just in this first video, so there's going to be 5 videos, and in this first video, I just want to briefly explain the journey we're going to take, and particularly the relationships between 3 key readings this week: 2 methodological and 2 theoretical and 1 methodological, and then relating all of that to a tutorial exercise that I'm going to ask you to do. So the first thing I'm going to do in the next video is go over the work of Nick Couldry. You've been asked to read an article by Couldry and Mayhas on how digital data is transforming the social. And this article is worth looking at because it's very much a big picture article that tries to frame and consider very, very large general shifts in digital media culture, and also tries to relate them to previous eras in terms of media and the relationship of media to the social and social power. And it comes from Nick Couldry is a very, very important writer on, I suppose, what we could call the topic of media reality. He's done a lot of writing on how media coexist with the social and indeed lead social life in particular directions. So he's a really important source that allows us to connect current debates about big data and big data power with earlier ideas about media power. So that's why we're going to be looking at him. And then the next thing we're going to be looking at is so Couldry and Mayhas lay out a kind of a grand map, paint a very large, broad picture of what's going on around digital cultures. And the Bain article is particularly useful because it applies that big picture about data analytics and particularly the rhetoric of digital media to the experience of education. So what she's going to be showing is how we can take the general ideas from Couldry and apply them to the particular ideas of digital learning, and therefore kind of help understand how what we're doing right now is actually something, when you're watching this video, you're actually engaging with the very kind of media dynamics that we're studying, which is kind of an interesting kind of paradox, irony, whatever you want to talk, whatever you want to call it. Then we're also going to be moving on toward a methodological application of this. I mean, there are certain political implications of Couldry and Bain's argument, but there's also a methodological aspect here as well, in the sense that Couldry and Bain are very much trying to, I suppose, problematize big data as a form of authentic or useful or objective knowledge. And implicit in that is a critique of what happens when you abstract evidence from its social context. So one of the problems with big data is it doesn't really tell us very much about the context of media users. So one of the ways to engage with big data is to think about what it doesn't tell us. Particularly, this is important because very few of us are actually in a position to gather or interpret that big data. So what we can fight back with is the value of taking a qualitative and critical approach, which means looking at the sorts of information that big data doesn't give us, looking at the value of doing research which is very deeply context dependent and which quite deliberately does not extract information from the social context that creates it. So we're going to be looking over what thick description is. We're going to be looking at how that idea is related to other concepts that you have encountered in your early media work, particularly the idea of semiotics and the idea of coded information. And then we're going to be using the idea of thick description to criticize, to learn to ask critical questions about what big data doesn't tell us. And then we're going to practice that by looking at your own data. We're going to look at some of the evidence which you have left as you've been using the ATS 3732 Moodle site. And we're going to be asking what that data does tell us and also what it doesn't tell us. And the reason why I'm asking you to do this is it's a first experience in looking at evidence and thinking about it in detail, thinking about what it says and what it doesn't say. And this, of course, is going to be exactly what you're going to have to do in your final research report. So that's the broad map of what we're going to be doing in this sixth topic on digital media and relationships. And I will now progress to the next video, which will look in detail at Nick Couldry's work.